Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sephardic U podcast. Sephardic U presents. I'm Nathaniel, and I'm here with my co-host Sam Bendayan. We're diving into Parashat Mishpatim, one of the most law-packed parashot in the Torah.
That's right, Nathaniel. Mishpatim is where the Torah transitions from divine revelation to practical laws, from Har Sinai's thunder to everyday justice. And what's amazing is how relevant these laws are still today.
Well, we'll explore how Sephardic tradition approaches these laws, and most importantly, we want to hear from you, all of our members here that are on with us here. So drop your thoughts and questions in the chat as we go along. And let's start out with a question here. What's one Torah law that has always intrigued or challenged you? Put it in the chat, and we'll start with that. So the first topic we'll hit is, why does the Torah focus on civil law? Let's start with this big picture. We just received the Torah at Mount Sinai, right? Last week. So why does God immediately shift to civil laws? Shouldn't we be talking more about something spiritual?
That's a great question. It's as if Hashem is saying, true spirituality is found in how we treat others. The laws in Mishpatim about damages, lending, money, justice, these are the real tests of living a life of Torah.
Well, I'm in reading this, first of all, it always takes me aback, because we start talking about how to treat our slaves, right?
Right.
And that's always confused me, I guess, because we just came out of slavery. We've seen how we were treated in Egypt as slaves, and we're coming out of that, and here we go having slaves of our own. And I love that there's laws and regulations and how we treat them, but what are your feelings on this? Was it just the way of times back then?
I think it was the way of times, but also I think slavery is an outdated translation, because like, if you poke a slave's eye out, male or female, that slave shall go free. If you knock a slave's tooth out, that slave, male or female, shall go free. Is that describing what most people now would think of as slavery? I don't think so.
I agree with you. I think, though, that's what differentiates us, is the civility we hold to not just other humans, but also the animals and the consequences of both.
Well, I think that there's a very big difference, though, between the slavery of Egypt and this slavery. This slavery is voluntary, I believe.
Great point.
And so what happens is, back then when people were, when they went broke, when they were in debt and they couldn't pay their debts, they would sell themselves into slavery. So what James was saying is correct in a sense, in that it's more like an indentured laborer, or somebody literally enters into a contract because he has nothing else to pay with. And so this contract can be broken if they are mistreated, which means I would think that whatever debt they had is forgiven, and now they're no longer a slave; they can go free again. So it's very different from what the Egyptians did, which was, forced slavery. So it's night and day, I think.
I believe that the greatness of the Torah is to even start with the lowest member in the totem of society. The slave was ignored. He was a chattel. That the Torah should make it its prime concern after the giving of the Ten Commandments speaks volume. The fact that the Haftarah by Jeremiah speaks of the destruction of Jerusalem because the law of slavery had been broken speaks volume about the attitude of Torah towards slavery. It should not exist. It addressed the elephant in the room. Never was the status of the slave taken up.
Right.
So what do you think? Is holiness about rituals, or is it about how we interact with people daily?
It is how to interact, because God says, man is made in my image. So you don't, and he says later on, you are all my servants. The land is mine, and you are all my servants. You should not be a servant of a man. That is why the ear of this man who wanted to remain slave was born, in order to show that he had become really a thing. He had lost his humanity that God had conferred upon him.
And I think, Nathaniel, you bring a very, very good question in here. Is it rituals or is it actions like this that define true spirituality? And I've always had a problem with over ritualizing things, because I've always believed that if you do things wrong and you think you're going to pay it back by some strange ritual, this is a form of sorcery or witchcraft.
Which it specifies in here in this Torah portion.
Absolutely.
To stay away from it, the sorcerer.
And so, I mean, I see this where it's like, okay, I did something wrong that God doesn't like, but I'm going to fool God, or I'm going to somehow change his mind by some rituals that I'm going to do, instead of doing what's really painful and difficult, which is altering my life and my actions. So I think rituals need to be put in their place for what they are. Rituals help us to sort of see things, or just take some time to take conscience of things that we do in our life, and things that are happening to us, and then use them to help us to act better, right? But the better action is really what the goal is, and it's not ritual at all.
Very good. Well, one of the Torah's key messages in Parashat Mishpatim, this parasha, is how we treat the most vulnerable. So not only, like Dina said, the slave, but also the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. And the Torah repeats this over and over. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the temptation for abusing people that have no power is great. So if you need to put laws in, those are the first you should put in, because it's like, remember, I mean, you have to think that us humans were kind of ascending from the animal kingdom, and in the animal kingdom, everything's about power, right? When predators look for a meal, they attack the weak, the sick, because it's an easy prey. And so this is how animals act and how they think, I guess you could say. And so this is the first thing you have to say is, you know what, this has to stop if you're going to elevate yourself. And so this is the most obvious thing to attack.
Well, it's powerful. The Torah doesn't just say be kind. It reminds us we were strangers in Egypt, and we know what it's like to be on the bottom. So our justice system has to reflect that.
Right.
Plus, it is a covenant that you cannot break. It is not like an executive order of the president. It is passed into a legislation. It is a covenant between God and us. We are accountable to him.
Correct. And very interesting that the people of Israel should be humiliated exceedingly before being taken out of Egypt and becoming a people and given a law. It's almost as if to say, you know what, there's no ego here. The first thing I did was destroy your ego, and now I'm giving you a law. And once your ego is destroyed, you have a clear mind. When you're haughty and proud and everything, that tends to color all your thoughts and all your actions.
Well, they had just come out of slavery. They knew what they didn't want to be, what they didn't want to have, what they wished they would be. And I think it is just a seminal lesson which we carry to this day.
Right.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question, a little side note that it's always been very interesting, bothersome, interesting. When that slave, quote unquote slave, but I like your explanation better, more of an indentured servant. When he says and claims he doesn't want to be freed, he wants to stay, essentially, he's brought over to the door frame of that house, and then an anvil is pierced through his earlobe into the door jamb.
Mhm.
What's the significance of that? What is that just showing he's part of the
You're
he's
attached to the house.
right?
Yeah.
Is that the figurative
Right,
imagery behind it?
right. He has become an object.
Right.
Just as the mezuzah that is affixed, so has he become.
So is our perception of him, does he lower himself on the totem pole by not choosing freedom?
He does. In Morocco, the man who wore a ring was looked upon very derogatively. He has, we call him al-Kharsi, the one with the ring, the ringer. It was considered despicable that he had
Because
to
that's what you
face.
do to an animal. You put a ring through their
That's
nose
right.
and
You claim property.
Mhm.
Suddenly the master is claiming property over this man, which the Torah does not want.
Right. Yet in this case, the slave has done so willingly.
Yes.
Right. The master cannot do this to the slave. The slave has to do it, has to say that he has to give his consent.
So
That's right.
is the perception of him lowered then?
Absolutely.
I
Oh,
mean,
it
he chose,
is.
this is what he chose. Now, I don't think you can treat him badly, right? He's still a slave. He still has the same rights, but
Yeah.
you have to know, of course, that this person chose this way of life.
That's
So,
right.
will your esteem be lowered of him? I think somewhat, because the person basically looked freedom in the eye and said, I don't want this. I'm not ready for this challenge, whatever. I want to stay a
Mhm.
slave. And so the interesting thing is Hashem allows for this, right? He said, well, look, it's free will. Free will is one of the cornerstones of the universe. And
True.
so it's violated very, very infrequently in the Torah, right?
True.
One of the times where it was kind of violated is when Hashem would harden Pharaoh's heart and then punish him, right? That was a bit of a bending of the rules there, but it is followed to the T, even in this case, where a person says, yeah, I want to choose slavery.
Mhm.
Respect it.
Yeah, when he
That's your
chooses
choice.
slavery, we tend to think that it's a single person. It might be for his family,
Right.
right? So maybe he doesn't have the means to take care of his family or his kids or his daughter. So to him, maybe the only way out is to again more of the indentured service, and
Mhm.
and if a slave is gets married to somebody else, if he has a girl that gets married to somebody else, then she's no longer considered a slave per se.
Mhm.
There are interesting ramifications to all of this.
By choosing to be a slave, he has forsaken his trust in God.
Oh,
Very true.
This,
yeah.
this is what the Torah does not want. That means he does not trust in God being his provider.
Yeah.
That's true. So he
Great
chooses.
point.
In
Yeah.
the Gemara, there's a conversation about why the ear, and just like she said earlier, Hashem had said, for unto me the children of Israel are servants. So the sages say, why the ear? It's pierced because obviously the person who chose being a slave to a man as opposed to a slave to Hashem did not hear what he was commanded at Sinai.
Very nice.
Right.
Well,
Very nice.
I wonder if it also falls within the rules that we have of no tattoos, no piercings.
Mhm.
Well, it
Mhm.
brings to mind something Absalom had said a while back. Absalom, I remember, right? And he had made an interesting statement that rings were kind of worn by people who were slaves in Morocco, and tattoos were
Mhm.
considered prisoners.
Mm,
So,
Prisoners were tattooed with their number or whatever it was, some kind of marking.
hmm.
And it's amazing that nowadays it's so in vogue, right, in the West to wear earrings and tattoos.
Yeah.
mhm.
And which brings me to an interesting point. I've seen many Westerners read this chapter or this parasha, and they get offended and outraged because there's slavery. And yet, if you look at last week's parasha, the Ten Commandments, one of them was the Shabbat, right? And what is the Shabbat about? If you cannot take one day off in seven, that means you are a slave to whatever it is you're working at.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's
Mm,
7 days in a week. If you can't take even one, that means you're not taking any breaks. You're a slave to your work. So how many people in the West voluntarily enslave themselves mentally, spiritually to their jobs where they barely see their families, they don't, have any time for spirituality or learning or anything else, and they just completely are 100% dedicated to their job. That's
right.
okay, right? But this form of slavery is all of a sudden an outrage. So we always got to think of, our bias and our point of view
Mhm.
and how inaccurate it can be.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think Parashat Mishpatim is the crux of the Torah. From all the other laws of the Torah are really enclosed in Parashat Mishpatim. And I believe that it is a warning about a slave in every category, in every time, in everything, like you so wisely pointed out. So we can be slave every day to a habit, to a tick, to a prejudice.
Hmm.
Yeah, to work, the things that we like, to substance abuse, to just anything, all forms of
Mhm.
slavery
Mhm.
Yeah.
that are constantly threatening us.
Well,
Mhm.
one of the things I've also loved about this, and from a legal or lawyer perspective, and maybe Mia will chime in on this, is the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, the punishments and the penalties that were given, and restitutions and liability is addressed in this. If the
Mm-hmm.
ox goes and gores somebody, whether that owner's with them or not, I think is the foundation of today's law practices, or law, constitutional law, criminal law. I think it's all, this is the foundation. What do you
Mhm.
think, Mia?
No.
Well, obviously, monetary compensation has replaced physical harm. And so the monetary compensation for a damage that we do to others or breaking a law, which could be described as damage to the state, um, it involves payment of money.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, obviously, sometimes it involves incarceration, but that I don't know at what point in time, and I'm now thinking that would be a really good to know. Was it ever we're going to poke out somebody's eye for damaging another's eye? I don't know.
I I don't think so.
I don't either.
Because this is employed in many ancient law codes. The the idea of scaring people, uh of of stating a penalty that's higher than it actually is. If you read, I think it's the three bhavas that deal with are the three tractates of the Talmud that deal with this, right? Baba Kama, Baba Batra, and Baba Metzia.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a number of examples of, murder or adultery, and those convicted were put to death or stoned to death.
Well, and if you also look at modern Islamic law, they still have this type of punishment.
Yeah.
Public beheadings, and they cut people's hands off for theft and
Mhm.
things like that. I mean, I think that, we need to take a hard look at this, because I know that in the West it's very frowned upon, and everything is reduced to money. But I think this is a mistake, because that what you're doing is you're elevating money above everything else, and then you're saying, oh, money can replace all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's not true. If a person is a billionaire and he kills somebody and he can just write a check, that to them that means nothing. And almost as if to prove this point, about a month ago, one of my daughter's elementary school classmates was killed in a car accident.
Mm.
And one of his friends was driving. This person was kind of crazy and he was speeding. This isn't the first time he does it, but he's rich. And whenever he gets in trouble, he just buys his way out of it.
Yeah.
So for people like this type of law in the Torah is exactly what the doctor ordered, because you would take a person like that and say, okay, now we're gonna kill you, or now we're gonna maim you, or whatever it was you did, and then watch what happens. Right? The
Well,
person will
it
instantly
used to
turn around.
work, right? In the 70s and 80s when crime was lower because we had capital punishment.
Mhm.
So at least in the Western world. So,
Mhm.
and to Mia's point, there was also monetary damage during this time, during Mishpatim.
Yes.
An ox that gores a slave, whether male or female, it was 30 shekels of silver.
The Torah stands in stark contrast to the code of Hammurabi, where and even another Nesh Nuna and the Hittite code that punished terribly for anything. The Torah only wants punishment for the loss of life. Otherwise, property, other things can be compensated for by money.
Right. Because money is a property, right? Money is a form of property. So how can you elevate property to the status of a life, or
That's right.
somebody's
Right.
eye, or somebody's, hand,
That's
or
right.
whatever? This is a glorification, a deification of money.
Yeah.
True.
Listen,
True.
you could study, I think you could study this parasha for months, if not years, with
Yeah.
how much is packed into this.
Mhm.
But let's move from the criminal side. How about the positive side? How about the business ethics that are taught in here? And especially from a Sephardic perspective, in honest business dealings.
Mhm.
And in this parasha, what's it talk about? False measures, taking bribes,
Mhm.
unfair practices.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, and Baba, we were speaking about the Babas. Baba, what is it? Baba Bata talks about at the end of it. There's an addendum where Rav Yehuda says that if you want to know if you want to see the righteousness of Torah firsthand, you study commerce and monetary law and stuff like that.
Wow.
Having good business ethics, kind of is a bridge for Israel and the nations to see just how how Hashem permeates, like how the Torah permeates everything that we do.
Yeah,
So,
see, actually,
Which is part of why I think it's a shame that so much emphasis now is put on studying Orachayim, the prayer laws. I mean, I get it, but at the same time,
Well, like Rafa said, expanding on him, Sephardic communities have always emphasized integrity in business.
Mhm.
And the rabbis like Ben Ishai wrote about how honest commerce is just as holy as prayer.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think
Right.
even more so. And I think that going back to what Madame said a few minutes ago, dishonest practices is another form of loss of faith in Hashem. Because you think that the universe is unfair, and so you have to protect your own. You have to be unfair. You have to cheat or whatever in order to make a living, because the system is not going to provide for you what you want. And so you take that step, and then of course this snowballs, other
Yeah.
people react, and everything just kind of goes downhill.
Yeah.
You have also to notice that length of life is promised to people who deal honestly in commerce. 3 times in the Torah, God promises long life. 1, respect of the parents. 1, showing the dame over her young to steal her eggs or her babies. And this for the weight. 3 times in the Torah, it says, and God will promise length of life.
Yeah.
That's amazing that commerce is a part of it.
Yeah.
Well, one of the famous lines in the Torah comes from this parasha, which is Na'aseh v'nishma. We
Yeah.
will do and we will listen. Why do we commit to action before understanding?
So,
There's that story, that midrash about Shalom HaMelech, where it talks about like how could he break these laws, these obvious laws about multiplying your wives, multiplying your horses, multiplying your silver, and it talks, there's the whole message about the homily is if we start to rationalize before we commit to doing, we'll find ways like lawyers to get out of the true responsibilities we have. So yeah, I've always told people, if you're when you start walking an obedient life, you do, and then whether it's lishma or lo lishma, you eventually will learn why it is, like, how this affects you positively.
Absolutely right, Rafa. The Torah teaches us that sometimes doing leads to understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's if you deal honestly, you might find that people respect you more. They deal honestly with you. They don't try to rip you off. And then when there's a business opportunity, they'll come to you first because they know that you have integrity. And
Yeah.
so these things have a way of coming back to you.
there
The
is a
reward
big
for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. The reward for a sin is a sin.
Mitzvah, yes.
there is a commentary, there is a dispute between the rabbis coming to the book of Genesis, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. The mistake of Adam, they say, is because he did not choose of the tree of life. Life would have taught him knowledge. He went for the knowledge and therefore was not able to understand what life was about.
Oh.
That is Rabbi Papo who wrote this. He should have reached for the fruit of the tree of life. Learning life would have given him knowledge.
An interesting twist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very interesting, because what do scientists say today, right? Knowledge is power. When you pursue knowledge, you might be pursuing power, right? And of course, we know about the prohibitions against power, and just try to imagine a world where nobody pursues power. It's almost unimaginable what the world would be like if nobody pursued power. So it would be a complete game changer.
Well, it's
the
that
whole
time
wor-
again.
The whole
And
world would probably be like one of those religious kibbutzes or something.
Right. I was going to say that. It was,
Yeah.
yes, it was an ideal.
Well, this I think if you had one key takeaway from Parashat Mishpatim, it's that Judaism isn't about what we believe, it's about how we live. And every action, from business to kindness to justice, reflects our values.
Yeah.
So it's that time again. We've got to wrap up. I thank you all for being part of this conversation. Make sure to follow Sephardic U for more Torah discussions, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everybody, for joining this week, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Amen.
Shavuot tov.